Hello, I'm Margaret Rogers Van Coops. I'm a professor and a doctor of integrated and alternative medicine. What that basically means is that throughout my life I have made a point of finding different ways to help people get healed. One of the things that we know is going on right now is all over the world people are suffering under COVID-19, and they're also suffering with weather situations, war situations. We have a tremendous amount of change going on in this world, and it all seems very bad. But in reality, it's a transformation. We are moving away from what was the Piscean age, now being in the Aquarian age, and we are beginning to rebuild this world according to the Aquarian age, which is communications, understanding, listening, learning, and evolving. So today, what I'd like to do is to talk about the first half of the soul structure coding and explain it to you, since I seem to be the only one who understands and knows how important the soul structure coding is. In fact, I've taught many students in Japan who are now giving these types of readings, but unfortunately they don't all speak English. So I thought what I'd do today is to explain the first three aspects of the soul structure coding and make that part one, and let you muse on it, and then I'll do a second video on the other half of the soul structure coding. So I first want to define that before we come into embodiment, we actually come in with this soul structure coding. So what is it? Well, it's a combination of your spiritual destiny, the things that you want to do on this earth. It's a combination of entwinement with other members of your family that you made in the spirit world. And it's also a combination of your history from your own personal life's experiences in the oneness. So if we stop and think about the magnitude of this soul structure coding, you can begin to understand that it is going to give you a tremendous amount of insight into who you are and why you came to this earth in this time. The soul structure coding is a very important part of our existence, and up until now it has been hidden from us because during the Piscean age we were aggressive, we were killing and murdering, war, we were starving and grabbing people's things and selling them and killing for them and so on. So very bad in the Piscean age, and all under the name of religion, philosophy, theology and so on, that was supposed to help us to evolve up to the next step of evolution. And I'm happy to say that we've done quite well. When you look back over the last 3,500 years of the Piscean age, we can see that we've come through a tremendous amount of change about what the world believes in us, what we believe in the world. The people have come and gone, and now here we are exploring. We're even talking about aliens and things like that. And I will just say here that yes, we've all been aliens. In fact, we're biogenetically engineered species, a combination of many aliens and our experiences on this planet and so forth. So I know that even as I say that, you may well be steeped in your religion and philosophy still from the Piscean age and close down the minute you hear this. But I'm asking you, please take a minute, listen to some more, and let yourself absorb what I'm about to tell you and see if it clicks with you. And I will say that being the only one that I've fully trained in English is a Japanese lady, Reverend Kanai, who you can find on our website universalchristchurch.com, and she does speak English, and there are a couple of other Japanese students that do. But for now, I'd like you to pay attention to what the soul structure coding is and why we have it. So the first thing to understand is that because we are spiritually universal beings in existence that can incarnate anywhere, we have to understand that if we were to jumble up all the experiences we've had and just arrive here on the planet, we would be in a great deal of confusion as to what our pathway would be. And since we are spiritually very clever beings, it would be overwhelming to know everything about all that you are through all time. Now, over the last good 60 years, because I'm 78, and I know that by the time I was 18, mediumship was very important to people. And so we began to evolve away from the Piscean age towards the Aquarian age, and during that time we awakened spiritually. And of course we've had great different types of waves of awareness coming over us throughout these last 60 years. And I was first given the soul structure coding when I had recovered from my death and was deleting Parkinson's disease. And of course during that time my spirit guides came to me and told me exactly what was going on and why I had evolved to a point of being swamped with everybody that I'd ever met. I felt like I was a trillion billion pieces split in 1,001 ways and had lost me. And through that time and the unbalances that I was going through in a marriage, it was inevitable that I was going to plummet into the darkness. And in that acute depression, doctors gave me some medication which turned out to be some sort of heroin derivative, an experimental drug. I didn't know that. I thought it was just something to stop the shakes. So over time, every time I shaked, the medicine wore off, I took another pill. And so over 3 weeks, without knowing it, I was ODing myself. But that was okay, because when I did clinically die and they brought me back, I knew what was going on, which was an added bonus for me. Well, I won't bore you with all my personal stories. The point of being here is to explain what I discovered. And of course, over the years, I've evolved with it so amazingly so that I'm able to read anyone in the world and give them their soul structure coding. And I would love to be able to do that for you. But before you might want to have it done, you need to know what it's all about. Now, let me first clarify that there are a lot of people, mediums, healers, and so on, who will talk about your soul reading, but they don't understand what they're saying, because they're actually giving a reading that says, in a past life you were ABC, and that reflects into this life, and you're supposed to learn as a result of that past history, that past life, something that is carried over into this life, and then they start telling you about what you're supposed to do, which is helpful, but it's not what the soul structure coding is. So here we go. I'm going to start to talk to you and teach you the first half of the soul structure coding. Now, the thing to understand is that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was a vibration, and in that sense it is said in the Bible that aliens came and made us pregnant and brought more babies forward. But I don't want you to worry about that concept. I want you to understand that if we're intermarrying or integrating or arriving in a certain area for a certain purpose, it is encoded into your soul structure. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is explain to you about God. Imagine you are God and you're sitting on your throne and you've created all sorts of things elsewhere in the cosmos and you're pretty pleased with yourself, and after a while you start to think, you know, I'm bored. I'm sitting here, nothing to do. I need something to do. I need to create something more. I need to create something special. I'm in that mood for something special. So being God, sitting there in your chair, all you know is your own existence and the many things that you've done before. But you're looking for something new. Now, that's no different for us in the physical form. We're always looking for something new. But let's go back with the concept of God. So as you sit and contemplate, you think the only thing I can do is send a part of myself out into the cosmos, and in doing that I can create aspects of myself. So symbolically we'll say that God, realizing he needed to give an arm to the world, gave it the order to separate from his body, go forward out into whatever is out there, and explore and discover and report back. So in the first process, one has to realize that God is completely and utterly all aware. So if we're saying that God is going to now send this arm out on a journey, it has to have a coding. And the very first coding coming from God within the divine consciousness is the sage. And so those aspects that were sent out to explore were encoded with the archetype of the sage. Now, we know today in our modernisms that sage means someone wise. But what is wisdom? If we are here on this planet, we might say that I've studied to a point of being a professor, and here I am wise under the influence of metaphysical things. But am I wise under how to train someone to drive a train or fly a plane? Absolutely not. And so you can understand that in the way of the oneness, each of the archetypes that I'm going to share with you had to take a slow and long journey through thousands of years, regrowing, reincarnating, and subdividing self. So the sage is basically the vibration of heart. So when we say God is sitting on a chair and feeling a bit frustrated, that is a mental state. But what stimulates God to send a part of itself away from itself to find something more? It's the emotion. And so the sage was encoded as an archetype to go journeying forth to discover in some way through the heart chakra, and I'm saying that in terms of any form, not just human form, that expression motivated to go out and say, here am I'm available, what would you like to do? Well, I feel I need to create something from my heart. And in the process of doing that, came about to find that it wasn't so easy to just create something, because one had to have a feeling behind it. And if that feeling wasn't totally positive and in complete understanding of self, then it could move from expression into a state of oration, mind, talking. So here we see the first sage ever created was in the vibration of Raphael. And so Raphael's job, in the way that we think about it and understand it, was to go into the world and give substance in a way that would express how we want to live, what we want to do, and be motivated by that passion within self to go forward and do anything that pleasures self. But what happens when you spend ages in the everyday self here on earth and you find out that everything you've worked towards hasn't taken the form that you wanted? You become frustrated, you become upset, you think about everything, and in time you decide, I want to share this information, and if someone's not listening, I might be negative and I might orate at them. I might go on and say, you have to listen to me, you have to know what I've got here. This is so vital to the future of mankind. Pay attention, learn. So the sage was in a way a door opener to go forward and just separate self yet again, because the original primal setting from God was separation of arm in my little example. So Raphael, in its own way, understood that the journey should be to create more forms. And how could it create more forms? By using its own energy. So we're calling Archangel Raphael a sage. And when you think about the primary archangels, there are 7 of them. And in the whole aspect of the soul structure coding, there are 7 aspects and 7 types of those aspects. So we're going to talk about the 3 today. We'll leave the other 3 for part 2. So having manifested self as the sage, then we had to look at what would come from the sage if it separates itself. After all, we would have had a lot of activities trying to express self and a lot of failures too in trying to tell self what to do, correct self, move on to something better. And the ultimate thing is to give a part of self away so that it can go forward and do something else. So that's all that Raphael knew at that time. And in separating self, the idea came to the sage that there should be something creative like God, because after all, God can do anything. And so Raphael, in its own way, created new forms. And one of the first forms that he created was the artisan. Now, the artisan is not necessarily an artist. Could be a scientist, could be a doctor. There's so many things that we can do to invent something new. And as we look around the world right now, we see a lot of people creating new technologies, and that in itself is creation. Now, the artisan in creation has a vivid imagination, which comes through the heart chakra again. I feel I need something more in my life. I'm looking out the window at possibilities while I muse on it and feel those ideas. And given time, I will go out and share myself with other people and my creative abilities. Now, of course, other people would be other forms that are also separating and dividing and so on from the sage. So creation is going on all the time. So I want you to understand there are many aspects of each creation. And if you think back to my model of God with giving an arm, and you see the arm broken down to every cell in that arm, now functioning in creating the same pattern of going forward and separating, then you can begin to see there are many, many more spirits that were evolving at that time. And when you have a lot of spiritual beings discussing what the creation is all about and coming up with their own ideas and their own feelings about it, it was inevitable that the artisan would often feel like the sage was orating away, saying, you can't just do anything willy-nilly, and the artisan is saying, yes, but I love to. I just have a feeling and I have an idea and I make something. And so it was that there was often conflict between the sage and the artisan, and it is known that the artisan is the lower aspect of the sage coming into form. And so when an artist is making something and someone comes along and says to them, well, you could improve on that, you could make it better, you could use a different mode of art, do something else, then artifice arises. I will defend my creation. I will work towards my ideas and my feelings and manifest what I want to manifest. Don't tell me what to do. And in that vibration, the artisan, now grateful for the sage birthing them, have come to a conclusion that they want to do the same thing and separate themselves. And so the pattern continues. And we move into the second growth of being aware, which is now through the mind. The first to manifest was the priest. And the priest was, in its own way, looking at what the sage had done and looking at what the artisan had done, and was seeing that things were well done, but not understood. So we had a lot of forms, we had a lot of interactions, and we had a lot of emotional expression. But hey, we didn't really understand what we were about, what our purpose was, what our direction was. And so it fell upon the priest to begin to look around and try and understand its existence, which is comprehension. And in looking today at us, you can see that we go to school, we study, we do all sorts of things, and sometimes we lose a lot of that information. But in the process of it, we actually come up with some ideas that stimulate us to make changes in our life. And so the presence of the priest with the sage and the artisan was an influence that made those two begin to control the heart chakra and the feelings and think more about the purpose of their manifesting new forms. And so it was that the priests gave form to their ideas. Now, form in understanding could be anything you could think of, so I don't want you to get too busy in your brain worrying about every little detail, because at this point in creation, it wasn't about detail as about evolving and manifesting more things. When comprehension is understood, we're clear in our minds about what we want to do. But if we try, we have to have some kind of negative to move away from. So zeal, which is the enthusiasm that we have, can often override logic in enthusiasm. So you can see there's a bit of a mixture here going on with the priest between understanding and feeling. And when you think about what a priest does in our earthly life, it is nothing like what the priest was doing in the oneness. The priest was not going around comforting people and saying, there, your loved one's on the other side. What the priest was doing was taking notes, understanding why we are, what we do, how we click with one another, and so on. And with all the enthusiasm of trying to pull the sage and the artisan into the consciousness of thinking before you act, there was often over enthusiasm on the part of the priest, who would then condemn the other two for not really pulling their weight, as it were. And so the zeal and zest stimulated the priest to yet again divide self and create more within its own ideas and its own presentation of how life ought to be. And when I say life, not as we know it now. And in separating self, the basic thing about the priest was he wanted someone to work with him. He wanted someone to understand that there are ways to do things. And so he birthed the slave. And the slave was able to serve the three of them, the sage, the artisan, and the priest, by listening, paying attention, because this is still of the understanding of the vibration of the priest, which is the higher self. And so the slave learned, studied, and knew to serve the other three, and in serving to help embellish the evolvement of spirituality and the evolvement of God's passions and desires to bring more forms that we could then grow and evolve in. And the slave would serve with joy because part of the team, everything's going down well. But when you've got now 4 people together, or 4 angels, however you want to see it, there is a chain between them, a bond between them. And if it becomes that the slave has to run around, as it were, doing everything all the time, reminding the other 3 what the program is and what they're trying to do, it could become an overload and the slave could feel in bondage. And when that happened, yet again, under the original programming of God, the separation, the passion and desire to develop self and separate self gave birth to the king. And the king was all about form. So when we look at the slave in bondage, we're looking at materialism in our world, but in the oneness it wasn't that, it was status. And understanding that one needs to have some kind of value and appreciation, the slave made a form, the king, who would then be able to take on other forms. Now that's quite an idea, because when you think about a king today, you think about them sitting on their throne, throwing around rules or performing according to country's rules to keep the country nice and tight and everyone really aware of who they are and their position in society. Well, in the spirit world of those days, when the archangels were creating, they realized that they needed to allow themselves to come into some kind of form, because until then they've been energy. And I want you to think about that. If you're just energy and consciousness and emotions, there must come a time when you feel, I need to actually go back to that God consciousness of having the power to create a form. And so it was that these angels stimulated the king to come into various forms. Now, here we might talk about Lemuria and things like that, when people say that was a time of magic, when spirits could appear on earth, as we're thinking about earth here, but actually they could appear anywhere, and look like something, and then blink of an eye look like something else. So during this time of the king evolving, it became a kind of game where everyone was coming and going and doing whatever they wanted to do. And I'm afraid there was a lot of competition, and we call that mastery. So the king was all about, I want to be top dog. And those who were created under the vibration of the king by the slave, and there were thousands of them if you want to think of it that way, coming back to the idea of the arm and each cell in the arm. So there were even more. So as we go down through each of the evolvements and creations of these archangels to make more forms, so we see many, many more creatures manifesting into a form that was quite magical, quite fun during that first time to explore being in form. So just imagine you're just energy in the oneness, and you can change your form any time, but it's never consistently forever. You would find they would get fed up with that. It's magic and it's wonderful, but I need to test it. So coming into the king form was about human form eventually. It took a lot of eons of time for that to happen, so don't worry too much about that. But we, in the mirror image of that, do get stimulated by a king spirit who's in embodiment to stimulate us to serve a purpose around them, to help them run a country or to help them run a school. They're not necessarily kings in the role of a king. No, they're more likely to take a back seat. But wherever they're working, they're doing something to bring education, emotional, mental status in awareness of how one does something, thus becoming a master of self. And I want you to hear that, master of self. So many of us are not in mastery at all. We find ourselves panicking, running around in fear and anxiety. We find ourselves in adversities. We find ourselves struggling, mourning the loss of things, and the list goes on. Well, mastery is about knowing when you have a tool, you use it, and when it's used, you move on. You don't carry everything with you. So symbolically, the mastery of the king was made so that we would learn to understand that we can have what we need, use what we need, grow through what we need, and evolve from what we've needed because we no longer need it. So the king gives us the presence of our individuality on earth, but this is eons of time before we can even recall anything like that. The king, if we put him into a real king shape just now for you to think about, i.e. Iran, Iraq and all these things that have gone on, we see how kings have been overthrown, killed, escaped, whatever it was, to go somewhere else, run away. But we also see that some people rise up and take their place, and they may have done it through tyranny. Now, if a king meets another king on earth, yes, it's going to be a battle, because it can only be one person in power, as indeed there's only one person in power in the whole of the universe, which is God. When you look at people on earth, what you find is a lot of people complaining that the governments aren't running things right, that the people in charge are bad, and they've all got better ideas. And when they do get their chance to take over, because they've been voted democratically, shall we say, and not forced by some war scenario, then maybe that person might have better insights. But what if they're tyrannical? What if they storm the castle, as it were, like I'm thinking of France right now, and break away from the old routines? France went through a lot of energy around the king during the revolution, and there was a lot of tyranny, as you all know. But ultimately, look what happened again: a transformation, a change of perspective, and an awakening to the peoples of earth that we are all human, we're all equal, and we all have a right to say what we want to say. So in order for the king to have some kind of control over this tyranny, and to present themselves as much more masterful in the ways that they want to govern and lead and share and teach, and the list goes on, they separated and divided self and created the warrior. Now, the warrior is not the fighter. No, we're not talking about swords and bows and arrows or anything like that. What we're talking about is another form of leadership, bearing in mind that the king and the warrior are about in embodiment, in our case, human. But we could be anywhere. We could be on another planet incarnating somewhere else. But wherever we go, our archetype is always the same. So when we look at the warrior, what we see here is an element of discovery. The warrior has to look at what the king has brought into form, has to embrace the sage, the artisan, the priest and the slave from the hierarchy, and to know that those who are an embodiment, who are encoded with each one of those, will come into their lives, because they must integrate. So the warrior's job was to be the hello, I'm here person, and I'm the person to come to get some support, leadership, guidance under the banner of the king whom I serve. Now, in our time, we think of the king as God. And so the warrior serves God. And right now there are a lot of psychics and healers down. They're not all warriors, but some of them are. And you'll hear them say, I am influenced by God. Whereas others who are psychic will say, I'm influenced by my life, I'm influenced by the angels, I'm influenced by the bad people, and I want to make this world a better place to live, and so on. So you can see now that the sage and artisan, created through love divine, the priest and the slave, who in turn created through divine wisdom the human forms that we know here as the king and the warrior, to be leaders in so many thousands and billions of years ago we can't think of, to come and develop human forms, and not only human forms but animals and ants and anything else you want to think about, and with the blessings of the other archangels who worked diligently with them to inspire them and gave them tools and different things to learn to live in form for a period of time. Now, we read in the Bible that people lived to be 120 years in the time of Moses and things like that. But try thousands of years, because these archangels didn't need to enter life for a period. They could be around for as long as they wanted in form. And so as the king and the warrior did their work, slowly the sage, the artisan, the priest and the slave also came into embodiment in different forms. And as a result of their experimentations with different life patterns and different things that they wanted to do, they realized they needed to have structure. And so how were they going to have structure if they didn't really have a true record of everything that they'd all been doing? So the warrior, yet again, through coercion from the others, said, okay, I'll separate myself. That'll give me a purpose. And through coercion, I will inspire myself to create one more form. And that form will be someone who keeps the records of all that's been. And so separation, and he created the scholar. And the scholar was very able to absorb knowledge, information, and in study work to keep a record of all the things that had gone before, and we would call that now in our time the Akashic records. Now what the scholar actually did in keeping the wisdom of the ages and the knowledge of the ages was to make sure that there was a light side and a dark side to the heavens, or whatever else we want to call it, of the Akashic records. And so anyone who has been in form and returns to the oneness after life has ended will go through record searching to find out just what you've learned this time around and how it fits in with all your other past lives that you have lived. And so when someone asks me to look at your past lives in a reading, it's the scholar aspect that I will work with to find out who you were before. And that knowledge is available to all of us. But because we are now steeped in human form, limited by our beliefs, our emotions, our mind, we basically cannot hold too much information. Whenever I meet someone who can speak 5 languages, and that happens now and then, I am absolutely amazed that they can flip from one language to the other without blinking their eyes, don't even have to translate from one language to another, because each language is known to them and easy to do. Well, just stop for a minute and think about that. If the other 6 archangels who were creating all our form were able to master all these things as they went along, of course they spoke one language at first, but given time they developed many ways of speaking, and in doing that they could speak any language. So when people come to me and they ask me something like, I'm speaking Spanish, can you speak Spanish to me? My response immediately is, no, it's so bad I wouldn't get very far. But if I have an Hispanic person who is talking to me who barely speaks English, I can still tell them all about their soul structure coding, and then they'll go away and have someone who does speak Spanish to interpret it. So I've never found that a problem. Hang on a minute. Tickling my throat is a throat chakra problem. And I'm still a doubting Thomas when it comes to trying to let spirit speak through me in a language. Now, if we go back to the 70s, 1970s, there were a lot of people who were channeling. That was the in thing at the time for trance work. And what were they doing? They were channeling dead languages. So they said. Could any of us say it was or wasn't? No, because there was no records of those dead languages, because they were long before there was anyone alive today or in the past who has the memory of those languages. But I did some little bits of research, and I noticed that when people who spoke nothing but their own language were channeling, often I could hear a Latin word, a Greek word, a French word, Portuguese word, which I don't speak at all, but I knew there was a mixture of words. And if you stop and think about the kids today who flip in and out from one Hispanic to, say, English to, say, another relative who speaks French, they grow up learning those languages and do not think about translation, but rather just speak it. So what the scholar does is it brings that inert wisdom from the oneness, the ability to have knowledge, to retain it and use it without struggles. But unfortunately, with evolvement, there's always someone telling you have to learn, and if you don't learn, you'll be left behind. And that is a extreme thing right down from the archangels and onward, because their journey, when they created it for them and for us, was to evolve to become godlike. And since they were originally godlike themselves, they want us to follow their example. And in trying to reach us over time, as you hear God say, we are God's children. So I also need you to understand that we are the children of the archangels and, of course, of other beings that were brought in on the schedule. So if we go back to these 7 archetypes and realize they're all integrated now and they're all in charge of all of us, you have to also understand that we're not the only journey they've made. They are the all-knowing, all-being, all godlike creatures, and they appear for us in many different ways relative to our time in awareness and what we need to know to stimulate us to move on. Now let me come back to the understanding that we humans, when we were made at various times in the creation, have our soul coding archetype permanently ingrained in our spirit. So I was born a warrior, as I told you earlier, and being a warrior, my pathway was to go out into the world and shake the tree, as it were, by sharing my knowledge, and in doing that to help people understand that there is a purpose to their life beyond the physical life that we all think we have to fulfill. The fulfillment of all that is divine love and divine wisdom. So our journey in form is to understand how to bring divine love and divine wisdom into our life. Well, what we've seen lately is people talking about the secret and acceptance before the turn of the century, and now they're trying to wake it up and put it out again. And so what we see here is people manipulating the coding because they're not aware of how they are running underneath their soul structure coding, which controls them to a degree, even though we have free will to follow their ambition, which is directly tied into their lessons and the reason they're here on earth. And if we stop and think for a minute about the fact that we have the COVID-19 spreading wildly all over the place. This, by the way, is a virus that is an alien virus that was brought here long before the ice poles froze. So once they started to melt, it was freed, and it is doing what it does. It evolves, because everything made during those early times when aliens were here was about the forms of that time. So I want you to understand that the sage, the artisan, priest, slave, king, warrior and scholar were all archetypes of us who were also aliens. So yes, there's a lot of people waking up right now saying, I know I'm an alien, I lived on Mars. And there's a lot of imagination coming into that. And remember that the sage gives us imagination in expression. So we can't poo-poo what people say. What we have to say is, that's an interesting story you're going through. I hope it helps you move on with your career, your life, and everything that you do. I was hearing someone at a conference talking about the fact that they'd been a transport driver of spaceships coming between Mars and Earth, bringing stuff here and there. Well, I can tell you that may or may not be true, but hey, that's recent times. When I talk about the archangels bringing form into our universe or the cosmos or whatever you want to, it's beyond our imagination how long ago that was. So we can't typecast the angels to say, hey, they're 6 billion years old or 10 billion years old. We have no idea here on Earth, because it is not revealed to us, for there's no purpose in knowing truly how the beginning of the world started. However, I will say that when the 7 archetypes got together, they created this planet. And in creating it, it is the Garden of Eden that was supposed to be for all of us to come and experience harmony, peace, tranquility, with opposing factors of doubt, fear, loss, guilt, and anger. Okay? So we have personalities that embrace the highest vibration of the oneness in our coding, and we also have the lowest vibrations in our coding of panic and loss, separation from God and the oneness. It's necessary, because you see, if we go back to the original idea of the arm of God breaking down into just single cells, then we can see that God needs that arm back. And in the same way, the archangels need their parts back. And in the same way, ordinary angels need their parts back, because those were their first experiments. And then in their way, those angels who created different forms throughout the cosmos, they need their parts back. And then when we look at aliens and people that we might have been, we are still trying to find our parts so we can give them back. So the Aquarian age is about evolving into the oneness in awareness. And to do that, we have to listen. We have to hear one another literally and understand them emotionally, mentally, and physically, and tap into the spiritual joy of unification with the archangels and with ourselves, and of course with one another. So how are we going to do that? So the next part of the soul structure coding is actually the goals. And each of us has a goal in many different lives that we live. And we have hundreds and thousands of times we've lived in different scenarios. So each time we come, we can choose one of the 7 goals. And the goal has a purpose. It keeps us on the narrow pathway, as it were. And if we fall off, then the goal pushes us through its positive and negative traits to climb back up on the pathway and get back on with our journey. Now, the goals are, again, in the mirror image of the first creation. Some come from the heart into the mind. Some come from the mind into the heart. Some come from the mind and heart into the body. And some assimilate into the unification of acceptance of our life and the things that we do. So I'm going to go through this for you now so that you can understand just what a goal does for you. Now, the archangels, I'm not going to bother too much with their names. I know I mentioned Raphael, but I'll just mention them here because I'm sure people are saying, well, what were their names? So some of you know. So we've got Raphael, then we've got the Herald, which brings us into the understanding of Gabriel. And then from there we go into Michael, who had the understanding of making the forms find unity. And so, in a sense, he's counted as the warrior, but he's not really a warrior. He's a divider of ways and means to make us learn. And then we have we have other ones. So I'm going to go. So now we have Haniel, and Haniel's job is very much in the forefront right now and working with me, because his job is to bring an awakening of our spiritual consciousness into the human form. And so throughout the Aquarian age, this is his time. Behind him is Faniel and Barakil, and names out. And so now we're looking at the vibrations of all of 6 archangels. And the last one is Zaphiel. And Zaphiel's job was to make some kind of structure in form where the dark and the light would battle. They decided through Faniel and Barakil that human form was out of balance. And so they brought philosophy. Faniel brought philosophy, religion, and things like that. And Barakil gave understanding of competition in order to grow. But we'll talk about that another time. But the main thing about Zaphiel is that he has taken the blame for our mistakes. And unfortunately, we've given him bad names like devil and so on. But he's not, never has been, and is a light worker. But he's there to make sure we don't stray too far. So by giving us tests, we are brought back to the fold time and time again. And so how are we going to do that? Okay, well, if we are like me here, an old ancient soul on earth, we're likely to have acceptance, as I have, because acceptance says I am that I am, which is the same as saying God is I am that I am. And I first heard that when I was 4.5 from God. If you want to know more about me, you can always get hold of my book, My Journey into the Oneness, where I came clean finally after so many years to tell the truth of stories that I hid. Because in the past, had I told the truth in those years, people would have broken me down as a useless witch or something, and not wanted to hear what I was saying. So, but finally Spirit told me I could write my story last year, so it's out. All right. So coming back to acceptance, what that does when I'm completely on par with everything, with the oneness, with guides, with my life and the things I'm doing, it gives me agape, which is the joy of my life and my existence and my purpose. And because I'm a warrior and I'm always on my pathway, my life has been a roller coaster through acceptance of having these wonderful times of joy, and then having times when there's absolutely no appreciation on my part, ingratiation. How could you put me through this test? How could you let me suffer this way? Why did you let me get so negative that I drank those pills down and didn't realize they were dangerous and die? Well, of course, time goes by and you start to realize there was a purpose and there is a reason. And so the ingratiation of acceptance is actually question mark, what's going on with me? And in feeling the fear, pain, anger, and guilt and loss, one comes to a point of saying there's got to be something better. And I surely did that time and time and time again. And I will say that not only the archangels but spirit guides picked me up many, many times and taught me so much that I'm able to share with you. Now, if one is in acceptance and journeying with that, there has to be an opposing polarity. And so there are people who are also born with goals of rejection. And so if I went up to someone, for example, and I said, I'm a medium, and they're a born-again Christian and they don't believe in mediums, as was back in the 60s, they're going to tell me I'm evil and I'm the devil. And yes, I had that happen to me. But in having acceptance, I had to learn to accept rejection. And as a result, I wrote The Rejection Syndrome. And what you see in that is a psychological journey where the soul structure that I'm talking about now was explained, along with text and stories made up, not real case notes. And that whole book was channeled at a time when it was needed. And if you're someone that likes to study well and know more about yourself, you might like to get a copy of The Rejection Syndrome and open your consciousness more to how the soul structure works. All right, so rejection allows a person to be in their own discernment, to find their own ideas and to process input with what they already believe and know, and maybe expand and grow more to be better in their down-to-earth practicality through the heart chakra. My feeling is that what you tell me doesn't suit me right now, so I am going to discern what you've said, put it on the back burner, maybe later I'll think about it, and then I can discriminate whether I like it or I don't like it. And if I do like it, then the discrimination will motivate me to go forward and try it. Okay? But if I decide I don't like it, then I'll put it into the category of prejudice. I'm against it, in other words. Now, when you've got the world changing as we have with the COVID right now, what we can see is a lot of discrimination going on, a lot of prejudice going on, and we've got a lot of people on the other side of the higher self saying, we have to share, we have to stop fighting, we have to find a way to humanize our beings and understand we're all equal. And as a result of that, these two battle all the time on earth. They're saying, I'm fighting for a good cause, and the others are saying the same, but they're doing it from different points of view, from the heart. Some are doing it from their fears, some are doing it from their glory and happiness. And so, if you're a prejudiced person, and you really are, you can't miss it when they're prejudiced. Everything's wrong, nothing's right, I can't get along with anybody, and everything I look at, I weigh it up, look at it, analyze it, and so on. Yep, you're in rejection. And that's okay, because you're allowed to be in rejection, because that's your choice. But hey, you might be borrowing it, because you can also do that. So sometimes it's a bit difficult to know what your goal is in this life, but the ultimate thing is, by the time you're on your deathbed, you're going to lie there and say, I did what I came to do. And if you are encoded with rejection, then you're here to make sure that people who accept everything don't get off and run away and get lost. You've got to pull them back down, and you've got to say, hey, rethink this, it's not quite right. Now, on the other side of the fence, if you're so lost in negativity, the people with acceptance will turn up and say, I accept you're miserable, but, I'll comfort you, I'll nurture you, I'll say they're there, it's okay, but given time, I hope you'll see there's an alternative and I'll give you a few. And so they support one another. The second two are growth and retardation. Growth is also a very important one to have. When we have growth, we are sort of like a doubting Thomas in a way, that we need to go out and explore to understand. And this, of course, comes from the heart into the mind. So when you understand what you feel, you evolve spiritually. That's where the heart chakra opens up to the mind to allow you to embrace the fact that you are a soul who is journeying on earth to understand the ways of the earth and to entwine yourself, shall we say, in activities on earth that serve you well to help yourself evolve and to help others. So there are a lot of counselors, coaches, people like that who have studied psychology and psychiatry who get stuck in their brain and forget to listen to the heart. So if you're having a goal of growth, then when you forget to listen to your heart, you're going to get confused. You're going to think about everything that could go wrong and worry yourself silly, and in time wake up to the fact that you're miserable. And when that happens, then you begin to study yourself, the negative and the positive side, and in awakening to I need to understand something better, I'll find a teacher, you evolve, and that's growth. And that evolvement is spiritual. Okay, it might seem like the ways on earth of doing it is physical, but it's actually spiritual. Now, if you're in retardation, that sounds horrible just saying it, doesn't it? It means holding yourself back from thinking. Now, of course, you could be born with a bad brain or something, but no, it's not really about your deformity. It's about how you process and put yourself down. So, okay, someone comes along and says, oh, I would love to teach you how to paint, and you immediately say something like, well, I'm so busy, I'm not free on Tuesday or Wednesday, so I can't attend your class. And when you get home, you're really doing nothing, and you're fudging yourself on the couch, and you're not really doing much at all, eating popcorn, and yet you feel this energy of guilt. You feel like you should get up, you should go out, you should do something. So the sense of atavism is to complain about what's going on around you, and that keeps you active, shall we say, in being aware of what's going on in the world. But if you're chronically overdeveloped on the negative side, then you could easily be withdrawn, mentally deranged in some way over some issue, and everybody's looking at you going, where's this atavism coming from? Where's this attitude coming from? Why are you screaming at me and yelling at me? Okay, and at that point, if someone can reach you from a growth point of view to help you understand that you're in your own way with all these ideas and that you've blocked yourself down to a point of withdrawal where you're not learning anymore, well, that could move you away from that. But there are people who stay in retardation their whole life. They could have Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, these kinds of things. And because they don't do any dumping of RNA and DNA that they've chosen to follow in their ancestors, they are living, walking examples for us who are evolving to say, we don't want to be like that. So they're signposts, and we need them, because here on earth we have the dark and the light. I'll remind you about that. So people who are in rejection and people who are in retardation are actually showing us the slowing down, the stopping, and the holding on to the past, and the rationale of what the past has done for us and so on. But what we need to realize now is the past is past, and we need to move on into the positive ways. So those who are in acceptance, growth, and in trying to help those people who are in so many words here, in rejection, retardation, are paired together quite frequently in human form to help one another out. Okay? Now, once we come down to the body itself, we have a lot of people who are very physically minded, like they want to be swimmers and run in the Olympics or something, or they want to stand on a stage and sing a song. There's so many different ways we can show and tell who we are. And this in itself comes under the vibration of dominance. And so if you're encoded as a primary soul coding of dominance, then you are not going to be sitting on the back burner. You're going to come into embodiment and find some way to be a leader. So if, for example, you want to run in the Olympics and win a race, you will be out there running track morning, noon and night, practicing, and people around you are training you, and you're wanting to be the star of the century. This is a dominant energy, and it allows you, by your example of what you can do, to be a leader in that you'll inspire other people who follow you later to want to either supersede you or at least be equal to you. And so that part of leadership is very important. And there are always leaders and there are always followers. And so some of us had plenty of time with billions of leaders, and others of us have groups, small, but they're important as well. There's no greater or lesser of anything about dominance. It is what it is. We lead, we teach, we share, and we give. But there's a negative side to dominance, and that is yet again, always something that we fight against, but it's in us, is dictatorship. Now, let's put a wife in the house. She's come home, the kids have got the toys all over the house, husband's sound asleep on the sofa, and he hasn't prepared dinner. Well, she's going to let rip. If she's got dominance, she's going to immediately tell him, why are you all not doing this? Get up, do this, do that, do here, do there. I need this cleaned up. I'm tired. I'm not doing it myself. You're doing it. Okay? And that is dictatorship. You're ruling the roost. And it's okay. You're allowed to do it. But if you thought you were going to be king of the world and you were going to take over every part of the world in dictatorship, i.e. we're now coming to countries like the Middle East, because we see it all the time, tribes against tribes, that's a dominant energy, and it's a dictatorship energy, and they're fighting it with leadership from their religious people. That's where they're at. But different countries have different ways of demonstrating dominance, and the people who are encoded with that will stand up loud and clear to be seen and heard. And yes, some of them will be pushed down by the people because they're in their negative, they're dictators. So what do we have? Who's the other half? Well, that is suppression. And you can see that obviously if a dictator is in the negative, the suppression part will be in its positive mode, devotion. They will come along and give all that they've got to try and lift up someone who's in a dictator mode and help them to see another point of view. Okay, so again, this could be a counselor, this could be a teacher, this could be someone who likes to run races and stand up afterwards and give a talk about dedication to being the best person one could be. So there's always an interaction between the pairs here. And so if someone who's got the coding of submission is really in awareness of themselves, they can give all that they have to the point of trauma, because you can't give every part of your being. You have to pull back sometimes, and so someone with submission can get very tired in giving. But in the negative, there is a level of subservience. We need to not have a big ego. We need to understand that there are times when we are followers. So sometimes someone has a goal of submission will follow someone who has a goal of dominance to help them be a leader. And they're a team together. And it can work on the other side, that someone who is dictatorial could attract someone who's subservient and follow them because they want to ride on their bandwagon. And of course in time they collapse. And the process of these two in the physical form is to show us the difference between taking pride in who we are and standing tall in our shoes to be a leader by example, versus those who want to stand and rule the roost. So we got to have both. We need the light and the dark in order to learn and evolve, and ultimately to say we are survivors in this planet and we are teachers to one another. And the final one, the odd one, is stagnation. Now, we need, you might say, well, who's going to be stagnant? But we need times of nothing happening in order to process where we've been and what we've done and where we think we're going. So someone who has stagnation is more than likely going to be someone who's born with a dysfunction. Why? Because if they have a dysfunction, then they can't do so much. And when they can't do so much, they need the other 6 archetypes, who are now encoded with goals, to come into their lives and help them by the fact that they're not 100% functioning. And in the process helping them, they serve a purpose of taking us out of the drive, as it were, to be successful, or the fear of being a failure, takes us towards how can we stand still and help this one person or many people to get back on their feet, to achieve an awareness that they exist here on this earth and that they too have a purpose. So if we think about a child who's born, say, encaphalectic and lives for a while, we might say, well, why does that happen? That's so bad, that's so awful, not having a fully developed brain and living, because the part of the brain that is developed has function over the body. Well, you might say, how is that helpful? Well, what it does is it suspends the spirit in the body, allowing it, by the way that the brain is, to observe help when it comes. Quite often, someone who's committed suicide could reincarnate with this particular goal, because they come to a point of killing themselves where life doesn't make any sense to them, so death seems more appropriate, and they can return to the spirit world where they can process that and then say, okay, so I didn't finish my little lesson there, I need to come back. And what better way than to come back with a goal of retardation, so I'm limited, and by being limited, I will attract to me all the people who need to serve me, help me, show me that life is valuable. And so having a part of the body suspended, be it mind, heart, body or spirit, is a way for that spirit to evolve and to teach all of us a lesson in giving, in divine love, to help that person live for as long as they can and receive as much help as they can and complete a life that was ended before, in order to go back to the oneness and say, I am that I am. So that's quite often a case when babies are born or people are born and they live a long life, but they don't have any consciousness. I have a friend who has a child who is now, must be coming to 50, who just laughs every day and is served by caregivers who just love to take care of him. And as they do, they learn to find their own joy in themselves. So you see, these people who are in stagnation can actually serve a very, very good purpose. But what is the negative side of all this? Well, it's inertia. When nobody wants to bother about a person like that, they're left alone, they're abused, they're not really taken good care of. They know it in their heart because they feel unhappy. And when you're unhappy, you just don't want to do anything. So you just lie there, a zombie. And even so, that is still a way of getting attention. and it's still a way of completing a life. It's still a way of serving a purpose, of making people appreciate that their brain, their heart, their body, and their spirit are vital to being in existence for evolvement, ascension. Now, when a person is taken on stagnation, they're in descension, they're down here, they're in their boots, they can't run away, they can't do anything, they can't change their point of view. They're very limited. And so it's not unusual for inertia to take over. But as we, the people who have full potential to do anything, watch them, we think, I can't be like that. They're motivating me to go out and do something else. So now you understand why the goals are there. And next we're going to the modes. This will be the last part that I'll do on here today. The modes give you your personality. And those are tied in the oneness before you ever leave with other people that are going to be your relatives. Now, if we're doing a long story in that we're following a chain of RNA and DNA experiences from ancestors, and it's our turn to come down and carry on the good works, then we will have picked our soul structure coding way before any of those ancestors were even ready to be born. In other words, there was a plan. And many of us who are down right now are part of a plan, whether it's a universal plan or whether it's a country plan or whether it's a group plan. It's going on. And you can see it. You can see people who are rising up saying they want to get rid of their leaders. You can see people who are rising up because they want more protection with health. You can see people are rising up because there's no food or floods have happened. You can see it all over the world. And what we're looking at is transition. And because we need to have a variety as the spice of life, we all need different aspects of purpose. And here I might say that the oneness knows all that will happen long before we ever have a dream about something might happen, because everything was created in the oneness. So all we are doing is acting out the drama of what was created. And to do that, we need a personality. And yet again, there are 7 aspects to our personality that we can choose. But we only have 3 parts that are primary to our soul structure coding. We have one for the mind, we have one for the heart, we have one for the body, and we might have one that is for simulation. So I'm going to go through these, and then we'll end this talk and I will come back with part 2. So in my case, I'm going to share me. I have power, I have passion, and I have perseverance. Now, you might say, why have I got those? And I'm going to explain it through me so you can understand. Being born in 1942 in a world war going on, and being born to a family in a family line that goes back traceable to 1066 on my father's side and further back on my mother's side to 60 AD, you can see that I've waited quite a long while for my ancestors to be born so that I could come into this time. And so I've been watching them doing whatever they've been doing, and I will tell you very, very strongly that I just absolutely was adhered to the period of the 1800s to the early 1900s, when women were rising up and making their way towards freedom. I was very adhered to Nightingale, who was the first nurse, and people like that. When I was born, I immediately felt an alignment with them. I knew that I knew their lives and so on, and I was only a child. But they were there for a reason. because I'd watched them be born, do their thing, and die. And so I knew what it was like to live in the 1800s. I knew instinctively what it was like to live in the 1600s. Certain little things, not everything, I was only a child, but images and things came to me. Again, if you want to know more about me, just get a copy of my book, My Journey into the Oneness, and you'll see the things I went through. So when I finally arrived on that day, I was already encoded with my healing skills. I was already encoded with my psychic ability. I was already encoded with my mastery in terms of past lives. And here I was using the warrior, knowing I had a pathway. So by the time I was 4.5, I knew I was here to teach. I knew I was here to use all my skills and talents in order to teach. And I was fortunate that I'd chosen ancestors who were all talented through time. So I had artists, I had singers, I had dancers, I had scientists and all sorts of things. So once I started to want to know more about me, and that usually happens around 4.5 to 5 when you go to school, that I first began to realize that I had an energy, a healing energy that I'd been using beforehand, but suddenly I was in school and I was realizing that my friends who were with me adhered to me like glue because they felt my energy. And whenever there was something going down, they always turned to me, the authority figure, because that's what power gives us. Well, what are we going to do when that boy comes and beats us up again? And I'm like, well, I'm going to watch out and keep an eye, and we can warm up one another. You'll find about these things in my book. And so I was very, very much pushed to be an authority figure at that very young age, between 4 and 7 years old. And that was not only because of school, but because my mother was a cripple. I had a sister. My father and mother were post-traumatic stress disorder, which I guess I was too, but I didn't know it then. And so you could see that circumstances pushed me to believe that I had the power to save people. And that made me think I'm the authority on healing. Small as I was, and giving readings to people, messages on buses, I had the nerve to go up to them. Even though I was consciously a bit scared, I had the nerve to go up to them and give them a message, which was always well received, even if I ran away as fast as I turned up to give it. Yes, so authority was in me through the DNA of the leaders, particularly on my father's side, and the upper echelon of leadership came with class. So I thought I could be who I wanted to be and do what I wanted to do, but oppression came very quickly with people telling me, Margaret, you can't do this, we don't know what you're doing, you shouldn't do that now, stop drawing, stop doing this, pay attention to the class. And it seemed to me that every which way I went, there was always someone telling me I couldn't be me and I couldn't do what I wanted to do. Inside, there was a rebel. And when nobody was looking, I would run off and play on my own, because then at least I could enjoy my own company and I could listen to my spirit guides, who would often comfort me because I was so much in trauma from being victimized in being a psychic. So when I was growing a little bit more and understanding more about me, as I mentioned earlier, I have passion, and passion gives you self-actualization. So what that means is I decided I am who I am. I've got my spirit guides who are helping me. I'm just going to do what I do, and if they tell me I can't do it, too bad. If I want to draw in class, I will draw in class instead of write the essay. If I want to write the essay while they're all drawing, I will do that. And, of course, I got C's and D's because I wasn't writing what they wanted me to write. But every so often I would channel something and I didn't know I was channeling it. I thought I was writing it, and I'd do an essay and I'd hand it in, and lo and behold, I got an A. But it was rare. But I realized as the years went by that my spirit guides were showing me that I couldn't be a rebel, that I had to fit in. And so with passion self-actualizing me to do what I wanted to do, it also allowed me to identify in the negative the will of me that was in the way. When you do something because you just want to do it, and there was an event, it's in my book, I'm not going to go into it now, where I decided to lie to my mum, and that was because a girl had a hold over me. Again, you'll read it in the book. And it led to a whole bunch of expose, and as a result led to me going up a class and being put in an older group where I was taught different things in ways I wouldn't have got. And that was very important for me to make me realize I did want to have a good education, because before that I just wanted to play. So identifying myself in the negative helped me to become more positive and to actually self-actualize myself to want to study. And so I had a lot of catching up to do, and I don't pretend I didn't. Okay. But yes, I had spirit guides teaching me as well. Now, having had power and passion manifesting in my teenage years, I realized once I became an adult that I'd always been persevering in the face of adversity. No matter where it came from, I had an answer. And I was always told, stop defending yourself and stop telling the truth or whatever it was, because I'd get victimization afterwards. So I just persevered in my own way to do what I knew I was meant to do, because spirit guides were telling me this was okay, you could do this and so on. And still today I'm the same, because those modes haven't gone away. And what perseverance gives you is persistence. So one of the phases that really worked for me is, if at first you don't succeed, try again. And yes, there were times when spirit guides told me, this is something you're going to do. And of course I'd immediately rush out and try and do it. And then I'd find out that it was too soon. The world wasn't ready for it. So it's like teaching about this soul structure coding. I started teaching it in Japan in 1994. They were ready. America wasn't. England wasn't. Wherever I went and I did the readings for them, they loved it, and they, this is like psychology for 2 years and all this stuff. And I did a lot of readings on it. But nobody wanted to learn to do it for others. It was too complicated, they said. Okay? And it is complicated. But if you really learn it, and you learn it by learning through your own life and your own soul coding, then you can apply that to everything you do, and you become a better person, as indeed I did. So with perseverance, I persisted throughout the years to keep focused on what Spirit had told me so many years ago when I was 4.5, that one day I would have a school. And I did get a school in England, and I did get a place here in America. But really my school was where I went. People invited me to different countries, and it ended up that Japan became the biggest of all, and I taught there for 26 years. And with one company for 20 of those years, where I was able to manifest all my courses, all my workshops, all my seminars, all my lectures, and grow and evolve to who I am today. Thank you, Japan. Thank you, Yumi Haibara, my translator, who's an angel. And thank you, all my students who now teach the soul structure coding to all the Japanese. And what I want you to understand now is that this is the time for general public across the world to begin to say, who am I? Why am I here? What's my role? And what should I be doing next? So here we're coming down to my story about me and perseverance. I am saying those who have been immutable, because perseverance will say, I am going to persevere being sat on the fence. I'm going to sit here and never change my point of view physically. The way I see the world is the way I see it, so I'm stuck in a rut. Okay? And when you think about being immutable, you're pretty lonely because everyone else is walking off doing something else. So when you stop and think about anatomically, there are other people who are persistent, i.e. me. I'm going to go to my dance class, I'm going to go to my workout and play golf or whatever I do. And I did that for many, many years and still talking about starting up again because it's exercise and my body needs exercise. Now, I have been immutable on that for a while because my husband was ill and dying. That's using it, saying, rationalizing, I can't go out, I can't leave him alone, I have to think about him first. And no matter what people said, oh, come and join us, we need a foursome or something, I would still turn it down, no matter what they said, because my rationale, my physical circumstances were saying, I can't leave my husband. Okay, but that's cleared. So now I can't be immutable anymore, I've got no excuse, which is what mutable is. I have to go out and do what I want to do. So now I put this together. My power, my passion, and my perseverance says I have the knowledge now. I am the authority figure. I'm a professor. I know what I want to teach, so I can build all my classes and courses. And now I've learned more about online, so I can teach online on Zoom. And now, because I've got tools to use that fit in with all the knowledge that I've been carrying for the 78 years of my life, can now be shared. So if it's anatomically possible for me to use Zoom, then I know it's anatomically possible for you listening to me being ready to want to learn about your soul coding. Now, the other ones that I'm not using, in a sense, I can borrow, and occasionally I have. So now we'll talk about the other ones. We have the opposite of power is caution. And caution says, deliberate, think it through, double check it, make sure you've got all your tools. When do you want to do it? Why do you want to do it? Where do you want to do it? Whereas with my power, I'm listening to Spirit Guide. Okay, we'll do it Friday. I don't question that because I've got acceptance, remember, in my goal. But if I had caution instead, I would be in my lower self, and we all borrow and use these traits. Oh dear, I really want to do this class, but I'm not sure if there's going to be enough people who will come, but I'll try it anyway. I'm mixing the two up here. And I set the class, and maybe 3 people turn up, and I'm hoping I'll get 30. What do? Do I cancel the 3? Or do I and say it's not working and get frustrated? Or do I say, think on it, deliberate with caution. These are 3 people, I can still teach them, but I will teach them only so much because I don't know if they're ready for what I have to give. That's caution, I'm not sure, see? But with power, it's like, okay, I'm going to give you everything like I am today and hope that you'll enjoy it. Now, if I'm in the negative of caution, that's a phobia. And I'm happy to say I didn't really have a phobia till I saw Jaws, and then dum 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 all the way through the movie. And finally, when it came up, I jumped on my friend's lap and freaked her out rather than the Jaws freaking her out. I was so into the fear of sharks, because once upon a time Spirit showed me a past life where I was hauled under a keel and I was bitten and didn't survive. So you can imagine, why did they show me that? And then this movie comes up. Well, it was to show me that I mustn't have a fear of living, and to be cautious about where I go and what I do, and to not put myself in danger. Now, I've travelled the world, and I've been in whorehouses, I've been amongst mafia people, I've been all over the world with all sorts of people, and I can tell you that I did borrow caution quite a bit, because I had to know their way and I had to think their way in order to give them the news that they are asking to hear, in spite of their negativity, and reach their hearts. So it was a big learning lesson for me. So yes, I used caution, and yes, we can borrow them and use them temporarily in situations. Now, the next one is repression, which is also the negative side of passion, or the lower self of passion. And we all need at times to get enthusiastic, and passion will give you that. And off we go. And as I said, I do, and I self-actualize all the time. But like I said, sometimes in my earlier years, I was too enthusiastic and I set things up, and things would go wrong. So in time, learning the hard way, I learned I needed to use repression for restraint. I need to put the reins on me, as it were, and say, hey, wait a minute. Are you sure the time is now? Are you sure that you're ready with all the facts? Are you sure you've got all the tools? You know, I even knew one time where I really got this lesson the hard way, where I was packed up, the car was ready to go, and we got outside, turned the engine on, dead. No life. Well, the rest of that day was spent running around, getting the battery, fitting it, getting to the event. We were late, being stuck in an area that was so tiny that I couldn't put all my goodies up on my stall. And I thought, well, this is going to be terrible. Nobody's going to see me over here. And yes, I was giving a lecture and doing something at that event. And then when I got to the event, I found out I was in a small room, and that I was up against other big names, and I wasn't well known at that time. And so I was floundering around, and I was angry. I was furious with Spirit, because they hadn't told me don't come. Because I wasn't used to not having an audience, because in England I was well known and famous, and here I was in America, nobody. But it was a lesson, see? I hadn't asked Spirit in the beginning. I'd made the decision myself, in my self-actualization, to go here and be seen, because I assumed people would want to hear what this British person has to say. Well, I didn't know I was up against someone else who was, sold millions of books and so on and so forth. But that was the way of the times then. There wasn't the videos. There wasn't even online stuff then. So it is what it is. But I went home, sat down, meditated, and talked to my spirit guides, and they said, well, we let you go because you wanted to go. We're not going to tell you can't do what you want to do. And I realized then I needed to think things through. That I was in a new country, and this was going to be a whole different ball game for me. And so there I was, really working hard, doing mind, body and spirit events and trying to be known and all the rest of it. And out of the blue comes Japan. And then I realized I wasn't meant to be known in America at that time. It wasn't my journey. My journey was Japan. And now things have gone by. I've built a reputation across the world, been to different countries, done all sorts of things. And here I am in America. And here I am teaching on Zoom and making my videos that I've done for a long time. So now you can see that perseverance allowed me to be persistent in the wrong way for the wrong reasons at the wrong time. And I was fixed, immutable, because I was determined to reach the Americans, when it wasn't what I was here to do. I was here to support my husband and his work with paranormal photography, and the things that he went on to do for me in the future. So it was a whole different ballgame. Now, I also have something to share with you, which is the opposite of perseverance. The higher self of perseverance is aggression. Now, I borrow that sometimes, especially when I was younger. I would run, I know what I'm doing, I'm going to go out and do what I'm doing, and I was dynamic about it, I'm sure, I'm certain. And for example, in my book, I wrote about how I was in dance school, and the little kiddies were doing, sort of 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, were doing their tap and ballet class, and there was a girl who was going to do her solo in between while they changed clothes. She was sick, and I was asked to go on and make up a dance. So I went on, did a tap dance, and the audience, all seniors, who'd be pleased with anything, clapped me for an encore. So I made up a second dance, which was good according to the teacher because the kids weren't ready. And then later on she approached me and asked me to go on and do a ballet dance and make it up as I went, because I'd already done my ballet and tap solos anyway. So these old folks were getting a lot and seeing me a lot because I was filling in. And there was one other girl who was my age who hadn't been asked to fill in. And while everyone had clapped and told me afterwards how, I had really saved the day and given me a big hug and so on, this girl, after we were leaving, came up to me and said, I could have done it better than you. And my balloon was burst. And I went home and cried because I felt her mutability. She was someone who was mirror imaging me in my glory and persistence. She was on the opposite side of the fence, putting me down. And I needed that because I couldn't be egotistical about the fact that I had enjoyed myself doing these dances, but hey, how do I know I wasn't channeling someone who was helping me dance? Because yes, they can do that as well. So when we have events happen, we do borrow the ones that we aren't encoded into, and we can slip into the negative as well as the light of both sides of these modes. Now, the last one, which I do use quite a lot now because I'm a mature, older person, is observation. And I've kind of used that on and off throughout my life, and I've borrowed it all the way through. I've observed people mentally unstable. I've observed body language. I've observed myself. I've observed other people. I've seen me in them, them in me. So I've used it spiritually. So although it is not encoded into my personality, the Margaret without spirit people, it is used by me and by spirit guides on a spiritual level, and that is assimilation again. So I can observe, and I can be very clear about doing readings and counseling and healing. I can see inside the body when people have got cancer and whatever, and I know what to do, this kind of thing. And the negative side of observation is surveillance. I mean, imagine you're a detective and you're trying to find out who's the murderer. You've got to stand and watch for hours. And I have to admit that in the early years working with spirit guides, I did a lot of surveillance. I needed to see how birds of a feather flock together, and I needed to understand how we integrate our differences and so on. So I used that throughout my life, always observing, and at times I probably got judgmental about people who weren't wanting to listen. I know I wasn't perfect, far from it, and I was just as bad in 2 marriages, dealing with issues and grumbling and grousing about it all because I'd married men who had issues, and they were burdening me down with that. And so, yes, I was in surveillance of that and saw it in many, many people, but it made me a better counselor. It made me more aware of how to approach people, and that's where the clarity comes in with observation. So I've now explained to you that we each choose one for the heart, one for the mind, one for the body, and if we're ascended, we can use assimilation as well as a tool. But what if you're not ascended? What if you're a mature soul and you're striving towards ascension? Then you could well have, for example, power, repression, and observation. Watching yourself get in the way of yourself when you put up your excuses. So yes, it's a useful tool for us everyday experiences if we learn to observe ourselves. So on that note, the only last thing I have to say is that watch out for part 2, because I will go into the other parts where we're talking about your attitudes, the way you're using your DNA and your RNA, and how you got encoded through your mother. That's quite an involved thing. And then we have the centers that are your spiritual coding that need to be explained. This is quite deep stuff actually when we get to that. And then the last but not least, the most important part of the soul structure, your chief feature. None of them are nice. I'll explain why when we talk about it. And when you understand all of this, then you might want to go and get a copy of the book I mentioned earlier, The Rejection Syndrome, and see how it all comes together. And down the road some, if you feel you're drawn to want to have your own soul structure coding done for you by me, then you can go to easypeasysolutions.org or sumariseducationcenter.com and send me an email there where I will then contact you. And remember, leave your phone number, because I'll call you and we'll arrange a time, or if I don't, my secretary will arrange a time with you if you want your soul coding. Now here I will say that people who are in transition to change and feel their spiritual self awakening are the ones that usually come to me and say that they want their soul coding. Who am I? Why am I here? What's my journey? What's my purpose? How can I be better than I am? So if you're interested in having your reading, it takes me a good 2 to 3 hours. My fee for it is a special right now. It's normally $200 an hour, but I'm going to be offering it for $150 an hour. That's 2 hours at $300. You're saving $100. So if you want to do that, get back to me through the websites I've mentioned, and I'll find time as soon as possible to help you out. So thank you for staying with me all this time. I really appreciate that, because it tells me that you're ready to learn about who you really are. So don't hesitate.